My name is Patrick Lewis. I'm the Director of Collections and Research here at the Filson Historical Society. Thank you for joining us for tonight's program. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the sponsors of tonight's program, the University Press of Kentucky. You'll be hearing a lot about them and the amazing work that they do. University Press of Kentucky Director Ashley Runyon has worked in the publishing industry for more than 2 decades in newspapers, magazines, and scholarly and trade book publishing. She was the acquisitions editor for my first book, which came out from UPK in 2015, after a years-long process that began before I had even finished my dissertation. If I can do it, you can too. A lifelong Kentuckian, she is dedicated to not only publishing forward-thinking books by local authors, but offering Kentucky communities access to history and literature, regardless of their income level, convictions, and missions in which I and we enthusiastically join her. Please join me in welcoming Ashley.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I was going to tell everyone that we go way back. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you all so much for inviting me. I have several of my colleagues here. If you want to talk about publishing in general, about your book specifically, just give us a yell after we're done here. So let me kind of give you the rundown of what we're going to talk about. First, we're going to address what is a university press. What does that mean? How is that different from a commercial press? And sort of what that review process looks like. We're also going to talk about what makes a great proposal. So when you are looking to a publisher and you're wanting them to publish your manuscript, you think they're a good fit for you, what's a great cover letter? What's a great pitch? What does that look like? And so then finally, we'll kind of talk about the publishing process. We'll talk specifically about what we do at a university press, which is considered a nonprofit scholarly publisher, versus what someone like a Penguin Random House would publish like too. But first, who am I? Why should you care what I think? Like Patrick said, I'm the director of the University Press of Kentucky. While we will be talking a lot about books specifically, because that is definitely my expertise. Like Patrick mentioned, I got my career start in newspapers, unfortunately, which kind of had their downfall, and then went to magazines, which also had their downfall. I promise it wasn't me. And then, coming to books. So I came back to the University Press in 2008. And for those of you that went through that time, it was a really scary time, especially in publishing. You're going through a recession. You're having a lot of folks that are losing their jobs. And so, from that, I think, I'm very careful about the books that we publish, just to kind of give you an idea of the numbers that we're kind of talking about. We typically publish about 60 books a year, but we receive about 1,200 submissions a year. And so, if that's for us as a very small publisher, just multiply that for a large publisher. So feel free, to ask questions about books. It is a one-woman show up here, so I do need to take some drinks of water. So I'm perfectly fine with some questions while we're talking. We can talk about books, but we can also talk about, magazine articles, journal articles, op-eds, even social media, kind of thinking about how do you get your voice out there? How do you get yourself to be heard? So let me know if you all have any questions, and we'll kind of dive right into it. So first, what's a university press? So a university press is typically attached to one university, and this is where I'm already going to complicate things. We are not only the University of Kentucky, although we do have our offices on the campus there. We are a consortium of all of the public colleges and universities in the state, the two major historical societies, the Filson, and the Kentucky Historical Society, and 7 private colleges, which I just realized is my next slide, and I have already gotten to that. So anyway, we'll pop ahead for a second. there's that info, and we'll skip over here in a second. So let's go kind of back to the mission of what we're doing. And so the mission of the University Press of Kentucky is to cultivate and publish high quality works about Kentucky, about Appalachia, and about the Ohio River Valley. That was our dictated mission back when we were founded. We just celebrated our 80th anniversary as the University Press of Kentucky, and this wonderful consortium. We are the only consortium in the United States that is private and public, and I do think that is very meaningful as well. So for university presses in general, what they're really getting to is how can we disseminate information, particularly educational information, whether that be more in the arts and humanities versus more in the STEM areas. How do we get that out to the people that need to have it? How do we make sure too that it's very high quality? And we're going to talk about peer review a little bit more in detail, but wherever you're going to be submitting to, they have a knowledge about the publications, far greater than you do. So, if you receive edits, if you receive revisions, I've worked with a lot of authors that take that so personally. They've been working on their book or their project for years. It's their baby. And then, you have to give a little bit of that up. So we're going to talk more about the review process, but ultimately, a university press title is one that we want to have taken through a high level of scholarly review. And all of our projects that we publish are presented before our editorial board. We have some members of our board here tonight, so thank you so much for coming. And so when we go to the board, we typically have two different readers' reports that we kind of talk about with them that really enthusiastically recommend publication. And most university presses have these, you can call them restrictions, but I think they're more of making sure that the quality level is there. So there's a wide level of review. Again, we're going to talk about that more a little bit, but ultimately what I think about with the university press and my mission for Kentucky specifically is, yes, we want to publish good books. Yes, we want to publish good scholarship. We want to publish up and coming authors as well as established authors on, both historical and new issues that are coming up. But ultimately, I want that knowledge to be out there. That's why we're so committed to our open access initiative. We're going to talk a little bit more about that too. But how do we get that information to the market that we have? And so what you see within here are a lot of the mission goals for what it means to us to be a university press. On the flip side of that you don't see in any of the mission standards is we have to break even too. And so, when, even when you're in a university press standpoint, which typically has some sort of outside funding, we do have some funding that we receive from the state, and we use that money to pay for the publication of books that are very valuable to Kentucky and Appalachian history and culture that might not be viable in some other way. But ultimately, whenever you're submitting your book to a publisher, you have to think about, you are living in you're submitting into a capitalist, business, whether you kind of like it or not. And so that editor, when they're reviewing your project, as well as when they're giving edits, they have an expertise in that level that I think is very important. So this is the one that I skipped to because I was already talking about all of those. So let's go on to the next slide, and I'm going to take a sip of water. Does anybody have any questions so far? Yes, Keith.
First of all, I want to thank you for publishing the members of my Nancy Wilson. Who is approaching 100 years old publicity and started in the Sunset Boulevard.
Yes.
And I am curious, even though I've been following this for most of my career, that I don't know how you became, how did you develop that niche in film history? It's fascinating that in Lexington, Kentucky, film history.
Absolutely. So let me talk a little bit of the film and then I'll talk a little bit more about Nancy's project too, because I adore Nancy. So these are kind of the big areas that we publish within. And so, Kentucky and Appalachian Studies, that's a given. I think a lot of people know within that. Civil rights is one that we have been publishing for about 20 years. Within that time, we have won multiple Lillian Smith Civil Rights Book of the Year. We've won multiple NAACP Image Awards, and we have won several. We've won the American Book Award for one of our civil rights books as well. So film. So that was what Keith asked about, and it is such a fun area. But honestly, when you're talking about publishing a lot of Hollywood biographies, there's a lot of tragedy in it too. But that's what makes them terrific stories. So that happened, Keith. Years before I was working at the press, I did exist. But about 30 years ago, one of our director at the time had a specialization in that, and so I started acquiring in it. We did really well. I personally think that we are one of the top biography publishers out there. We know how to do them. We know how to do them really well. We do them within a variety of subjects and topics. So for film, so I recently have given this list to our senior editor, Natalie O'Neill, who is expecting a baby very soon. And so that's why she's not joining us here tonight. And so I have gifted her that list, but it was really hard to let it go because it's such a fun list to work on. But I'm trying to get less, individual projects under my belt. But Nancy Olson Livingston was one of my favorite authors to ever work with. So Sunset Boulevard, she's Betty Schaefer in that. If you haven't watched it recently, it holds up so well. And she is a riot. And the book is yes about her film life, but it's also talking about her life kind of being this Hollywood starlet and married to two different husbands who were very much in the music and in Hollywood scene. So JFK, the night of his inauguration, is partying at her house. Marilyn Monroe is her friend. The Beatles stop by. So it's a wild biography. I forget the exact numbers, but one of the readers, when we sent it out for review, said, for a 92-year-old woman, and she says, I am 91. And so I left that in the board packet because I really enjoyed that. So, but she had a sold out event in LA when the book came out, and we are working on a paperback for it right now. So I adore Nancy. She is quite lovely. But you kind of I try not to rock the boat too much when it comes to genre, but I will say that the genre is becoming so much more mixed. Right now, I will point out Dorian, one of our authors who had an amazing event here a couple months ago. His book is poetry / biography, kind of thinking about Josh Gibson's life within poems. So, I think that really helps us to be able to think about projects that have a couple different areas. So, for example, women's history and horse history are two other areas that we have a lot of interest in. And one particular book that we have coming out that we were just discussing with Julie and Patrick over there was Astride. And so you could even throw it in that it might be a civil rights book as well, because women were marching on Washington to get equal voting rights. And to do that, they didn't sit side straddle like they had always been told to. They marched on Washington, straddling the horse like a man would, and because they could do anything that a man did, and they deserve those same rights. So, those are the types of fascinating stories that I think they're important. The narrative flow that is so important, because ultimately, yes, you want to publish this information, but you want to get it to the widest market out there. I want someone to learn something from all of the books that we do, from the very scholarly books to the horses and history books and the film biographies, all the way to, the Kentucky Bourbon Cookbook. We're not just publishing books of recipes. I want you to know, why bourbon is important to Kentucky heritage. So I think that these shift a little bit over time. Keith, depending on where we're sort of looking in a particular area, pop culture is a new area that we used to be very popular in that kind of faded. So we're trying to, make a comeback in that. But I do think that that's something that's always in flux. A lot of people are surprised to know that we have 2,000 titles in print. Those are all in print as in physical form that you can order. Those are also available in ebook. We were publishing ebooks before it was profitable, and we definitely paid dividends within that. I do think publishing now is as much about, getting this information out there to Amazon and to Barnes and Noble and to Google even, as it is, publishing a wonderful book. And so to kind of wrap that into the narrative of tonight, when you're speaking with your editor, keep in mind what they have in there and what they're dealing with too. They have a lot of submissions. They're trying to kind of keep publications within the areas that have done really well for them. Ultimately, we need to have a lot of information from you and about the book to be able to get that out in the real world. So to brag a little bit about the University Press of Kentucky, I mentioned a few of these awards that we have up here. We do have a Pushcart Award that we just won last week, which was really great. So we've had some really great national press as well. We've made it several years, always in the New York Times. My favorite Washington Post quote, from this year was a review of one of our books, and it starts, quote, "This extraordinary book from the University Press of Kentucky," end quote. But, I'm really proud of the work that we do. Yes, we need to, break even, but, no one's making a profit off of our books. We're trying to do these, to get these out. I have had the extraordinary opportunity to work with some amazing authors over the years. I was the editor for Bell Hooks for Appalachian Elegy. I was Nikki Finney's editor for her new paperback collection. And then I've done 4 books with Crystal Wilkinson. So it is sometimes when you stare back at it, it's almost amazing that you get to work with such amazing writers. So to kind of break down those different areas that we're just talking about. So Kentuckian Regional Studies, these are a few books that have come out for us in the last kind of year and a half. Kentucky Quilt and Quilt Makers, speaking of trying to make a rebirth in the popular culture area, it did win the Best Popular Culture Book of the Year in Women's Studies. So I think that is good. And am I able to announce the Tony Ryan? Okay, and so the Unnatural Ability, I literally just found out in the hallway, is an honorable mention for the Tony Ryan Award. So we're very excited about that. We did lose Milt during the publication process for this book. And so, and he knew it would be his last book. So it's definitely a love of art. Bourbon 101, which Laura would be upset if I didn't give her a shout out because she worked really hard on this book. It's a beautiful bourbon book. I often say to the board, bourbon keeps the lights on. So we sell a lot of bourbon books, but we do try to educate people in those as well. Albert used to live in Louisville, and we have done 8 books together. So I think that he is my top ranking author in the number that we have. The Bourbon 101, as you might imagine, is for the inexperienced consumer. It does go, step by step, and you have quizzes as if you were, in a class and having to learn a little bit about bourbon. There is information about mocktails in those as well. So we do try to cater to everyone. And then Tar Heel Trans by Stacey Jane Grover. This one was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award. And we've gotten amazing reviews for this, and we're going to be bringing it out in paper next year. So civil rights, we talked a little bit about them. The top right that you'll see is the John Harvey Wheeler. It's a fascinating book about how individuals, particularly in the kind of the North Carolina, Central Appalachian area, were fighting to get the same banking rights as white consumers. I am working with Brandon Winford on a new project. He is wonderful. So keep your fingers crossed for another William Smith Book Award. And then we do partner with a lot of Kentucky organizations. So the Introduction to Black Studies book that you'll see here, Eric Jackson is a professor at NKU, and we did work with NKU to get this book funded, and it was the 2023 recipient of the Clark Medallion Book Award winner. So we are very excited about that. We do partner with the Association for the Teaching Black History Project, and they just had their Juneteenth event, which is professional development for K through 12 teachers, and we did provide free copies of all of Introduction to Black Studies, as well as some of other titles within that area to those teachers. Poetry and prose. So I think that we have done some fantastic projects within this. You'll see Gay Poems for Red States, which made it on Good Morning America. Also was a Stonewall Honor Book. Drinking from Graveyard Wells was a finalist for the Ursula K. Le Guin Prize. And then Daughters of Muscadine, did it win the Weatherford or was it just, it won the Weatherford? Thank you, Margaret. So I will say this as someone who has done a majority of nonfiction books, and just to kind of put that into perspective, as a personal editor, I have acquired about 200 books myself, and then as director, I've overseen about 240. Within that, I've only done about like 10 poetry and fiction. Honestly, they scare me because nonfiction is so objective. And, it's a fact or it's not. I can decide whether I like their writing style, but, ultimately, I can back that up with facts. My goodness. Fiction, short stories, and particularly poetry is so subjective. Margaret is smiling. Wave your hand, Margaret. Margaret Kelly is our acquisitions editor who lives here in Louisville. And so she has taken over our fiction and poetry list. Bless her. It's a really hard job, but it is a rewarding one too. So we will talk a little bit about submission guidelines versus fiction versus nonfiction just a little bit. So we'll get more into that. And then going back to film studies, here are some of the ones that we've had within the last year, including the Warner Brothers, which was the 100th anniversary. So 100 years of the Warner Brothers. I thought it was a wonderful history, not just of Hollywood, but of the immigrant struggle and the Jewish prejudice that the brothers faced once they were here in the States. So some fabulous books here. Ultimately, other than Jessica Lange, who I don't think is tragedy yet, the 3 of the 4 of the film books that you see, have bad endings. So just to ruin it for you. So I've talked a little bit about accessibility. And so there's kind of a couple different things that we do to work within that. One of them is offering more than 1,300 titles available to all Kentucky K through 12 public schools, public libraries, community and technical colleges, and the consortium schools that we have. We're adding that all of the time. I think that it's important not just to publish books, but to be able to get them into the hands of the people that want to read them. Another thing that we're doing is bringing in several grants to subsidize getting physical books into different libraries. One successful grant that we got from the Steele Reese Foundation funded 1 copy of Aes Raffalacha, which is a Frank X. Walker children's book discussing the people and places of Black individuals in Appalachia and why they're important. It also has a glossary for the parents that might be reading it, and in case they don't know who we were talking about. So I think it was a really great project, but we got a grant to have 1 copy of that book in every public library in every Appalachian Regional Commission county. So these are the things that I think are really important and distinguish us from a commercial press. So as we're kind of going into the publishing process, I've spoken a lot about why I love university press publishing and nonprofit publishing and why I think that is important. But I have to be frank, if you want to be making any money off of your books, you should not go this avenue. So, thinking about publishing a book, it's a lot of labor. It's a lot of love. My former director used to tell authors that, maybe you can take you and your partner out to a nice dinner with your royalties. I'm slightly joking, slightly. But it is one of those things, since we're not, profiting from those books, we have to be fair. We do offer royalties for all of our authors, but they won't be anything like you would get at commercial press. So as we kind of go through the publishing process, I'm going to talk about what we do at a university press and then what you might expect at a commercial press as you're kind of going through that. So we talked a little bit about peer review already. But the difference that you would have at a university press is it's going to be a single blind anonymous review. So what that means is the author would not know who the reader is, but the reader does know who the author is. And so what I tell authors is I'm going to be looking at your manuscript for flow, for narrative, for fit for our list, for structural integrity, just, is it interesting? But I want two people who know a lot more about this topic and are much more knowledgeable and experts within that area to review this book. And that is well before we get to copy editing. And so we're going to talk a little about the life cycle of a book here in just a second. But copy editing is what most people think about when they hear editing. I was an acquisitions editor for 15 years. I had editor in my name, and I can't tell you how many people flagged me on LinkedIn as a copy editing as one of my skills. Oh no, that's not something I am capable of. But whoever came up with it, I don't know who it is. Probably some old white man. But sorry, I should have said. But someone came up with it. And editors are drastically different things. So you have a content editor who is looking at your book for kind of overall structure and fit. And then you have a supervising editor that is really going down to the nitty gritty, line by line, word by word, and being able to have the differences in those. So let's go to the life cycle of a book. And so this is something that we share with all of our authors to kind of give them an idea of the entire publishing process. And for us, that's 13 months. That is not 13 months from the time that you first get in touch with us. It is not 13 months from the time that you get your peer reviews back. It is the 13 months from the time that we have, final manuscript, final images, final permissions. And I get a lot of pushback on the timeline. And the truth is, it doesn't take us that long to physically put together the book, but it does take us that long to adequately market the book. We need to be able to announce not only to Amazon and Barnes and Noble, but also, independent booksellers a year out, being able to have that information. So we'll kind of talk about each of the stages and what that looks like. So a good proposal, that's something we're going to talk a little bit more about. We're all the way to peer review. It is very often that there's going to be some revision. I don't know that I've ever had any sort of book that has come through that at least doesn't have, some minor changes that they need to make. No author is perfect, and we don't expect them to be. And so once everything's approved by the board, they go into our editorial department. So that is when all of the bits and pieces, the Microsoft Word documents, the JPEGs, all come together and start to look like something like a book. So we have a team in-house that works on a couple different levels. So first we go through copy editing. And yes, we're checking for spelling and grammar, but we're also looking for, narrative flow, consistent style, sort of repetition, being able to kind of take those out and being able to, work with the author to tighten up the manuscript the best that we can before we get to the design part of it. From here, that's when we get to typesetting and design. And so when people think about that, yes, the book is being flowed to look like a book that you would format, that you would hold in your hands and you would flip, page by page. But also keep in mind, 25% of our sales are digital. So what that means on our side is at the same time that we're flowing a book for the print version of the book, we simultaneously are doing an ebook on the other side. And so the reason that I like to share this with authors is because it can be quiet at times from your publishing house. It's not uncommon to go 6 or 8 weeks to not hear anything. Don't assume that means that nothing is happening on your side. So I often refer to publishing being an art and a science. So an art is, bringing in a great manuscript, a great idea, having, this creative product that goes into a book. The science of it is putting everything in our database. So when you search into Google for the book title and the author, you come up with what we want you to. And so you kind of have to marry both of those together. So once we get to typesetting and design, that's when the workflow kind of splits off and you're talking about print and ebooks together. Printing takes a while. If you're talking about a big full color book, you could be talking about 3 to 4 months. If you're talking about something with a jacket, it could be 2 months, it could be 6 months if you're talking about 2021 and you're in the midst of the pandemic. We err on the side of caution of having our books in early. So yay to my team for making that happen. Because the printer world has been, much like everything during the pandemic. There were paper shortages, there were labor shortages. Printing prices are considerably up 80% in 3 years. And so, when we're working with a printer, we're doing everything on our end to make sure that a book comes out on time. That does, but sometimes it is out of your control. And so, we've been very lucky. I don't think we've had any books miss their pub date this year. But sometimes it is beyond that. So the last area that you see is marketing. And I think that this is where I get a lot of questions from authors really early on in the process, a little cart before the horse. And I understand from an author's perspective is, they don't want to invest too much time in you until they know that you can effectively market their book. But I need to know what your book is before I can tell you how I'm going to effectively market it. So, we have 3 and hopefully 4 soon. We're in the process of hiring a 4th employee within our marketing department. And so within that, we do a lot of different work, both within sales and publicity. This is true both of a university press and a commercial publisher. That you're going to have your marketing contact that you work with at the press. That publicist is going to go out to different review outlets. So that could be, an NPR affiliate. It could be a local TV station affiliate. It could be the Guardian or the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Courier Journal. So they usually have really good relationships with them. So that, much like acquiring books is developing relationships with authors. In marketing, that publicist cultivating those relationships with media. And so, when you tell them, oh, I've got this amazing book that you just have to read, you can't cry wolf too many times, you really have to give them good content for them to kind of trust you and be able to meet with you. On the complete other side of that, publicity is another thing that is often very what's the word I'm looking for? Unseen by authors, which is the sales side. And so we have independent sales representatives that we work with. Most smaller presses, as well as indie presses, that's kind of the model that they use. So you would have an in-house sales manager that handles some accounts. But, you know, I don't have the time or the means to pop into Politics and Prose in DC on a monthly basis and, you know, tell them about the books that we have working with. Now, if you are someone like a Penguin Random House or a Simon Schuster, kind of, you know, the bigger, larger publishers, they're doing all of that in-house. And, you know, you might have seen, you know, particularly within the last 2 years, there's been a lot of consolidation on the commercial publisher side, where, you know, a lot of the smaller publishers, where I would say a publisher would be between 40 and 120 books a year as a smaller publisher, are being kind of bought out from folks too. So that changes, you know, how your relationship is going to be, but it's just kind of something to think about when you're going out to think about working with an editor. So final couple things that we have on this line here, the publication date. And so that is, you know, the date that we typically like to have a book launch, if that's appropriate for the title that we're having. That is the date where bookstores, Amazon, all of your major vendors, it is live. It is ready to go. And so from then, you know, we're sending out press releases, we're sending out information to media to, you know, get interviews, get book reviews. I'm sure you all are very well aware that book review editors are rare these days. So, you know, sometimes you have to think about how can you get coverage for your author, for your title, that is not just a book review. You know, what are they doing within the community? You know, an op-ed that they could talk about that is relative to kind of what's going on within current events. So there's a lot of different ways that we work with authors. We also, you know, do a lot of submitting for awards. Thankfully, we have won a lot of those. So 2023 was the best year we had ever had for awards. 2024 is going to beat that. So I'm really excited about that. If you would like a list of the specific awards, just come and see me afterwards. And I actually do have those with me. So anyway, but those are the types of things that happen down the line. And whether you are talking with a university press or whether you're talking with a large commercial publisher, the truth is we can't market your book after 6 months. It's just the truth. That doesn't mean it won't be available. That doesn't mean that you can't go out there and, you know, continue to, you know, set up with events and work with that. But I can't go to my sales reps again and say, hey, you know, this book is a year old. Why don't we pitch it again? That's just, it's not how the animal works. It isn't my decision. And whoever you're working with, it isn't their decision either. So, you know, kind of keep that in mind when you're working with someone on the marketing side, things for that. So let's kind of talk about finding a press that's right for you. And so a university press might be the home for you. I will say the one thing that I do kind of want to make clear is that we lean a little more general interest at the University Press of Kentucky than some of our other scholarly counterparts. But that means that everybody has their areas of publication that they're really well known in. When I was the trade director at Indiana University Press, we had great areas in Jewish studies and in folklore. And so when I was there, even though I was developing more of the general interest books, those are kind of the two areas that we were really focusing in. Whereas, you know, here at the University Press of Kentucky, that might be, you know, military history, that might be popular culture, that might be film studies, that might be civil rights. So how do you research? Google. This is how I do it. So as much as I don't love Amazon, they are still everyone's biggest customer, and they are the easiest way to search to find books that are like yours. What you do is just scroll down on Amazon and see who the publisher is. It is not fancy research, but it is effective research. And you know what I think as well, you know, particularly if you're publishing within a genre, that you are very familiar with. So let's go back to the film list. Look at the spine of the books that you have, on your bookshelf. Who's the publisher? And that's going to be your first step to see, is this something that's going to be a really great fit for them? I try, sending rejections is hard. And I try to be very helpful with them to kind of point folks in the right direction. Because ultimately, a lot of times I'll get a great project, but it's just not a good fit for our list. And that is not a judgment on the quality of it. It's just the way that things are. And that is true of any publisher that you're going to be talking with. Now Penguin Random House is a much wider net than we do within those genres, but they're still only going to be publishing in those areas that they think that are going to, be successful for them. Success for us can be monetary, but it can also be qualitative. The awards, the reviews, the engagement with authors, those are all things that we consider very mission driven, grants that get our books into libraries and into schools. Those are all relevant. So first, do some research. Basic Google, doesn't have to be hard, but try to figure out who are the other publishers that are publishing books that are similar to mine. So second, talking to relevant editors at conferences. So this is a little bit more geared to the academic side, but I think that this could be true of coming to an event like this, or, going to the Carnegie Center, or, going to the Kentucky Book Festival, having that engagement where folks are going to be available. There are a couple of fantastic agents here within Louisville, and, there's lots of really great events to be able to have those. If you can't, obviously see them in person, thinking about what a pitch would look like for them. And so then finally, when we're kind of thinking about, reviewing different subject areas, that goes a little bit back to, what's the niche that that publisher is going to be publishing in? What are they looking for within that? So let's say that you've done your homework, you've done all your Googling, you've really put together a great list. First thing, don't dear editor, and don't BCC a whole bunch of people. That guarantees you, either delete or your stated rejection email. It doesn't take too long. It can take 30 seconds to, look on the website, look at the person who is acquiring in the area that you're publishing in, and send them a nice email. And I will say, if the area that you are publishing in is not listed on the publisher's website, unless you have some kind of in, I'd save yourself the trouble. So, publishers are very open, particularly on their submission guidelines of the areas that they're working within. So when I receive a submission, what do I want to see from someone? And I think this is true kind of across the board. I want to see why it would be a really good fit for our list and why I should care about the story that you're telling in 2 pages. And if you can't tell it in 2 pages, I'm not convinced you can tell it in 400 pages. Because you have to be able to think about, if it takes you 2 pages to tell it to me, you get 20 seconds with the New York Times. How am I going to tell the New York Times what your book is about, to be able to have that? That's not to say that you won't get published if you have something longer. But you need to be able to catch the eye of the editor who's acquiring in that area. Often it warms my heart just to have a submission where someone references a book that we published that recently won an award or recently, had a great review. That to me is enough to, okay, let's put my toe in that door and get it open just a little bit more. And so, you need to think about why your book is great, but also who are you? In today's world, it's not just having a great book that matters. It matters about getting out there on whatever platform that you have to get to that audience. And so typically, a platform can often refer to social media, but I don't necessarily think that that's the only platform that authors can have. You can have a voice within your community. You could have a voice, within your organization or your college or university, whatever that's going to look like for you. How do you plan to get out there and promote your book? The biggest, most successful books that we have had in my entire career, your publisher is going to bring all of their contacts that they have. And we've been, taking years to kind of cultivate these relationships. We're going to bring everything that we have. The best books are when the author brings everything that they have, their college roommate married, someone who's a reviewer at, the Times what's the word, Vogue or something like that. But kind of bringing all of those together to set up a conversation and being engaged and kind of making sure that your book is available. One of the biggest pitches that I do have, particularly when we work with an author who is looking for a little bit more monetary, value in publishing, or if we're working with an agent, is, we're not going to be able to offer you as a university press the kind of, financial gain that a commercial press necessarily would. But there's a lot of care in what we do. And one promise that I do make to all of our authors is that we're going to keep those books in print in perpetuity. So we did request some money from our foundation. We also have some board members here tonight. Hey, Nana. And so they were able to bring about 800 books back into print for us. So that's something that I think is very important, keeping those books available and viable for the years to come. So with all of that, I've talked about a good 45 minutes. So there's, our information. If you don't follow us on social media, you should. Katie here works in our marketing department. And so we have, great information about events. We have all sorts of events going on all the time. But I'm really proud to work for the University Press of Kentucky. I've told this to a couple of my colleagues, but I'll say it again. So I used to say that, I might not be changing anyone's world, but at least I can sleep at night, knowing that I do something well. And then I said that to an author and she said, but no, you're changing my world. And she said it so earnest and honest that, I don't say that anymore because, to an author, having a great experience with your publisher, I want that to be true, regardless of what the outcome, because, publicity and sales, even if you do your best, and keep this in mind when you're working with your publisher, it's a loud world out there. And so, it's hard to get reviews in a place where everybody's going to see it because nobody reads the same things anymore. So, keep that in mind that, focus on having a good relationship with an editor who will talk you through a contract and, not talk over your head and explain to you, what these terms mean and what that means for them. So there's no surprises down the line. But that's what I would recommend for folks, when you're reaching out, be honest about what you can offer, brag a little bit, and keep it succinct. I wish that I had time to read, 20-page proposals from everybody, but we just don't. So it is the way of things. So I will take a pause and we'll answer any questions anybody has. Yes.
Literary agents in the area, how do you find
Sure.
next question is, how do you find your illustrators? Oh, did you hear that?
Yes.
Oh, how do you find literary agents in the area? And also, how do you find your illustrators for your books?
I mean, my answer is not going to be very groundbreaking, but Google. Alice, if you have any better answer, I'll throw it to you. But so, there's a couple within the state of Kentucky. Alice Spielberg in Louisville was specifically, a Spielberg Literary Agency was one that I was thinking of when I made that comment. Honestly, I think getting an agent is harder than getting a publisher. But if you have an agent, then you're probably going to get a better competitive deal. And you're going to have someone who has not only your back, but hopefully an honest communication with you about, if there are some, shortfalls in, your manuscript or your proposal as you're having those out. I would have said pre-pandemic that you should go to Book Expo, but Book Expo didn't survive the pandemic. And so, I would say in Lexington, I'm not sure about Louisville, but in Lexington, there are often agent meetups at the Carnegie Center. So that's the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning. They have a lot of really fantastic events, not only with agents, but if you are looking for someone to, help you think about, narrative flow or developmentally editing your manuscript, the Carnegie Center is a really great resource there. Jen Maddox, who's been a longtime employee, just took over as director, and she's fabulous. So I know that's not a great answer, but that's that's probably as best I know, honestly.
My kind of question is, how do you find the illustrators for the books and illustration?
Laura might throw in here too. So we don't have a ton of individual illustrators, not to say that we don't. And one of the things that I have been more mindful of in about the past year and a half is getting more Kentucky and Appalachian artists on the front. And so if we can, I'll flip back a little bit. But kind of thinking about, let's say these right here, a lot, I don't know that any of those are custom illustrations other than the barn, maybe. Yeah, so yes, and so we use a lot of freelance designers. It's different with every press that you've worked at, and honestly, the time that I've been at the University Press of Kentucky, we've done it like 3 different ways. But right now, we send out our more general interest books to really high-profile designers who are willing to work with us at unbelievably competitive costs that we thought that are winning designs with big commercial publishers. We've won numerous design awards this year. So to kind of get back to your question, it is rare that we have the funds to go out and fund an illustrator for a book just because of the nonprofit status that we are. I'll use something like Rita Michael in her cookbook that we did back in 2022. She had worked with an independent illustrator who was a tattoo artist in the region and had those custom illustrations done. But typically that's funded by the author, and that's going to be a very big difference if working with a small indie or academic publisher versus a commercial publisher. Obviously, a commercial publisher is going to help you with that.
Submissions directly.
Yes.
You take submissions directly from authors. Is that typical for other presses, or is it just the university press? Because the other small presses or the big boys, I always thought you had to go through an agent.
The big publishers, you typically do have to go through an agent. I will say every press is different. Every press has different submission guidelines. We take nonfiction submissions year round, but then we do limit fiction and poetry to once a year, just because it's a small component of what we do. It is often, if I can use, Sarah Band, another Louisville publisher, they typically have open windows for the different areas or series that they're going to be publishing in. So honestly, it depends on every single publisher is a little bit different. So I would just look to their website and see what they have. But yes, I mean, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to have a hard time getting into a commercial publisher without an agent.
Well, we had one from the Zoom come in. You'd mentioned authors doing op-eds. Do you have any suggestions for other places that are good for publishing short pieces?
Sure. I think a lot of literary journals are very often overlooked. These, typically have a very short print run, if not an only digital run. I think particularly if you're thinking about poetry, that's a really great way to be able able to be included in that. I do think it's really great to think about getting within kind of your area in writing group. So for example, we go to Appalachian Studies every year. And so yes, we're doing history books and that, but a lot of the folks that are there are, working in the more creative spaces. And so I would think that, having as many connections that you have, much like we were talking about, we're gonna bring all our connections, you bring yours. Getting at putting yourself out there and networking. I hate that word, but it is what you're trying to do. But if you can be able to get out there and know what other folks are working on, then you might be invited to be part of a new edited collection. Again, I think doing a Google search would be really great. AWP, which is the Association of Writers and Writing Professionals, is held annually. It is literally booth after booth of journals, magazines, book publishers that are looking for submissions. So it's going to be in LA next March. I would highly recommend it. That said too, the only other thing that I had forgotten to mention is the literary workshops in general. So, if you're looking for more of a day shop, the Carnegie Center is something really wonderful for you to think about, but there are wonderful, the writing community in Kentucky is amazing. And I do not think that it is celebrated enough. But there's a lot of really good places to go. The Appalachian Writers Workshop in Heinemann, Kentucky, which is just outside of Hazard. I have seen some amazing speakers there. Nikki Finney, Barbara Kingsolver, Katie, I can't remember her name, but I can see it. Anyway, All the Living is her name, if anybody can remember her last name. So All the Living is the title of her book. So, but anyway, the Appalachian Writers Workshop is such an intimate event, much like other writing workshops where you're going to be spending, a week with folks and having that constructive criticism and, really, literally workshopping your project to be the best that it can be. And I think, I know we're summing up here. If there's one thing that I can kind of say when you're thinking about working on your project, let yourself be open and honest to feedback. Try not to take it from a negative place. Rarely, when someone is giving you that feedback, is it coming, negatively from them? They want to, your publisher and you want the same thing. They want the best book that has the best shot of success, whatever you define success as. So, try to have that relationship if you can, and just enjoy it too, because, it's not all about book sales and reviews, although those are nice, but, I've been working in the publishing industry in Kentucky for, 20 years now, and you meet a lot of different people. Patrick and I have known each other for 15 years, so, 13 years. Those are just, relationships that you develop over time. So there's our information. Follow us on our socials. Feel free to visit our website. Our contact information is there. And like I mentioned, I do have some lists. If you are interested, you can find some lists of awards and reviews and some other information about the press in general.
Well, thank you so much. And as you said, there are some really wonderful UPK colleagues in the room, so we can stick around and maybe have some conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.